Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Mastermind for the Masses. Excited to have Colby back with us this week, and we also have Shan as always. So, what's been going on, guys? What's been going on for you, Colby?
Decent amount. So the week that I missed was actually because I forgot that I was moving Friday and that the podcast was that day. So I was doing a bunch of moving stuff that day and signing the all the paperwork for the new home. And then yeah, the following week, this past Friday, the hurricane somehow still was strong enough and made its way up to the Carolinas, as I'm sure some people know, caused a decent amount of havoc. So I'm still without power. It's been like a full week. Luckily, the where I work has power, and where I play hockey has power. So I get to pretty much do everything normal outside of my home. But yeah, unfortunately, we still have water. But yeah, like just no power at all. So
That's
that's been pretty shitty. But it is what it is. Could have been a lot worse. I mean, my biggest worry was that something happened to the home, but nothing happened. Cars are good. That would have been pretty tragic to move in and then immediately have it have to make an insurance claim or something weird. So yeah.
yeah, it's wild that last week Shan and I were talking about that hurricane and it made it all the way up there. That's crazy. Definitely
Yeah.
had. I think we were fortunate, but there were a couple folks around here that unfortunately had some pretty bad issues. But
Yeah.
like you said, everyone's safe at least, so that's the key thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Shan, what about you, man? What have you been up to?
Not too much. I've been cleaning up around the place from the slight damages from the storm. Just a little bit of the yard work, a little bit of the pool area got hit a bit. I did, as you were saying, we did get lucky because half of the county where I'm at lost power for at least a couple of days. In fact, my rental property, which is literally 2 streets down, lost power, but I didn't. And of course, it's because I bought those generators, and I just bought another one too, like as a backup. And I haven't touched those damn thing at all. It's been 6 years now, and I'm almost like just waiting for the power to go out one day so I can use them. But yeah, other than that, it's been a pretty simple week, going by quick. How about you?
Um, well, real quick, I'll just say, they talk about good luck or good fortune is when preparation meets opportunity. So the fact that you're prepared, at some point that opportunity will probably come up, and that'll be awesome that you have the
Yeah.
generators. But for me, I actually had a pretty unique opportunity this week that I jumped on. So the Service Desk Institute reached out to me and asked me to help them out with an interview. So I was the interviewer rather than the interviewee. Um, and so I got to be on that side of the lens for a really interesting interview with Frank Abagnale. And if you're not sure who that is the guy from the movie Catch Me If You Can, or at least the movie was based on his life that Leonardo DiCaprio played. So I'm hoping to be able to share that with our listeners here soon in the near future too. After editing, I just did that yesterday, but that was pretty neat to get to chat with him and hear everything that he's done. After the events of the movie, because he's really, when you talk about that high performer and high achievement, right? Made maybe a couple of dumb mistakes as a kid, but learned from those and definitely created some amazing stuff. He's working with cybersecurity now to help prevent some of the things that he exploited, 30, 40 years ago. Um,
Did you
so,
invite him on here?
no, I didn't get a chance to actually invite him on here. That would have been good. I
Yeah.
was,
Oh, that's super cool.
yeah,
That's super neat though. Yeah, definitely share it when it comes out. I'd love to listen to it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Same.
yeah, it was really neat. So that's what I was up to. But it got me thinking a little bit too, right? Because again, his origin story is a little bit checkered, and but I don't think you can argue that it was ambitious what he was doing, right? Um, so it made me wonder a little bit. When does that? I mean, I guess what role does ambition play in success? And when does that become more of that immature state and maybe blend into a little bit of that greed, right? So I wanted to get you
Mm.
guys' thought on the value of ambition, and maybe we start to go down the road of how to keep that ambition mature and in a healthy state. So, whichever one you want to jump in there, I'm gonna open it up.
Yeah, I guess I can start off. I mean, I'm just trying to think because it's sometimes it's difficult to like think retrospectively about what your motivations were and stuff like that, and what exactly led to the choices that you made. But I just remember when I graduated out of college, I didn't feel super ambitious at the time. And I think it showed just in the sense that like I just kind of like got like whatever job that I could, and I was just like, oh well, just see what happens. Like I didn't really have a plan, and I think in large part I didn't have a plan because like I didn't really have any like big drives or ambitions at the time. I was just like, I need money, I need a job. Let's just start there, and then maybe I can make some goals after that. Because right now I just feel completely aimless. So I do think that was like a kind of like interesting part about like my initial journey with my career and everything was just that it's hard to be ambitious without like any sort of like semblance of like a plan or goals or anything like that, right? You do have to like at least start with that. I think there could be like some general like drive to be successful in whatever you do, sure, but I do think that's a little bit different than saying you're ambitious about something, right? Or am I wrong about that? What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's interesting you talk about the necessity having to be met first, right? Your needs have to
Yeah.
be met. But I'm curious to think to maybe get Shan's point of view on this. Is it considered ambition to go after fulfilling your needs, or is that just like a necessity and then the ambitions don't come? You wouldn't call someone ambitious until they have different goals. Because I could see the goal of just making sure everything's taken care of as being an ambitious endeavor personally. But I don't know, Shan, what are your thoughts around that?
I think I think it can kind of be like a cause and effect scenario. Honestly, I think it is a little bit hard to be greedy without having some layer of ambition. I'd like to. I just finished Outer Banks again because the new season comes out the 10th. So everyone who hasn't seen that show, you really should. It's basically in a quick summary. It's about hunting for gold or treasure hunting. So if I'm looking at like ambitious and greed, actually, there's a whole lot of it during the series, right? One, they're searching for a 500-year-old treasure. So you have to be in a layer to it without spoiling. You have to be ambitious to actually pursue that kind of treasure hunt and actually like have be optimistic and have the mindset that you're going to find it. But at the same time, you have to be able to like lift that layer of greed that inevitably comes the closer and closer you get to your end goal, right? Like if I'm hunting for 500-year-old treasure, I'm getting closer and closer. At one point, I'm starting to fill my head with, all right, the people that are helping me, like, what are we going to split it with? Who can I cut now? Who who can I kind of turn against to get more of the gold or more of the treasure, right? Like that greed really starts to kick in and almost combat your ambition, or maybe it doesn't combat it, maybe it amplifies it, but either way, I think it really clogs, kind of gives you some brain fog and clogs like your overall determination for the goal. And I think that like that kind of scenario happens in life too as well, right? Like you might be working towards a dream job or something that financially pays off really well, but as you get closer and closer to it, the greed starts to conflict your mind, right? Like when should I pull back on the ambitious piece and start cutting ties or start taking advantage and making sure all my needs are met and kind of drop your regular morals or your regular like humble characteristics that kind of got you there, if that makes any sense.
So it's kind of like at some point you have to, I mean, maybe to like to a loose extent, like drop your concerns for what you need and just like take a chance essentially at something greater is like what
I
you
don't
think
I
you
don't think
classify it
anyone's
as.
like, oh man, I hope I don't get greedy. Like I don't. I think it's way more complex than that. I think it literally will brain fog you, right? If you're not good at recognizing it, and this podcast is a good example, right? Like it kind of gives you that perspective to think while you're ambitiously pursuing a goal, you can kind of have that reflection point before it happens, because greed really will kind of turn knots in your head and make you make decisions that at the time seems beneficial because you're going to pay out the most, but in the long run, you might damage friendships, you might damage relationships, you might damage even your own like personal characteristics that you truly you believe in yourself towards, if that makes any sense, right? Like key characteristics that you grew up with.
You
Whenever
Hmm.
talk
you let greed take control, and this happened to me for sure.
you talk about benefits, right? You just mentioned the beneficial aspects of it. Would it be fair to say that based on who benefits or at what cost, that's what determines when it becomes to or starts to go into that immature greed aspect, right? If I'm focused on only benefiting myself at the expense of somebody else, now I would say that that's probably ventured into greed, as opposed to focused on success for all of us, right?
I think
Um,
that's a good way to kind of picture greed, or at least like characterize it before it hits you, right? Like if you're going to hit that reflection point, that's a good way to define it, so you can kind of tell whenever greed kicks in. It's almost like anxiety, honestly, in my opinion. Like it might lead you literally to make on the fly decisions that you normally would never make, but because you have something like towards what you've been working on, right? Like you have that end goal, like in eyesight's reach. It makes you just question every decision you make, or even like the last minute decision that you're going to kind of either screw yourself or screw someone else over just for a potential short term gain, right? Like I think that's a good way to define that.
yeah. So there's nothing wrong with ambition, but when you put someone else at a detriment in order for you to achieve, now you've crossed over into that negative aspect of greed.
Yeah, I think greed's a cost of being overly ambitious, right? Like, because if you're overly ambitious, you're more than likely going to hit your goal. It's just you hear it every day, right? Like if you stay consistent, you never give up, you're going to get where you want, as long as you have realistic expectations. But I think you know nothing comes without a cost, and to be overly ambitious, you're going to run into greed, and greed can change your character.
It's
When I'm
interesting because like I don't think people like because I think there's like a problem with the use of the word greed to some extent too, and in the English language, just because you'll hear people talking about like being greedy from a purely financial perspective, where it's just like you're trying to squeeze literally as much money as you can out of a given situation, right? But I think you also have like greedy being used in the sense that like I'm just trying to get as much as I can out of the situation, and like maybe sometimes I try to get too much, and then there's like some sort of like consequence that you don't want. But because I think like people honestly do think like about being greedy in a ambitious sense too. Like you could sense you can make the argument that it's like, oh, I'm just trying to uh you could say I'm being like greedy with my ambitions. Like I'm trying to min max to the absolute greatest extent that I possibly could with this specific goal. Um, so it's
Yeah,
like I do wonder to like to some extent like I think we want to like make that clarification. Like I think what you guys are really pointing out is that it becomes an issue, like your ambitions become an issue when it requires you to step on others or to hinder others to such a degree that would be like morally not okay. But that
yeah.
it's like I don't think either of us or any of us would disagree that it's okay to sometimes if there's no harm to another person to try and stretch yourself to get way more than what you maybe initially sought after.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with both of you. Kind of said the same thing about defining greed, and I agree. I think that's the way I look at it. Um, and if you're trying to like highlight the negative connotations of greed, which honestly is majority greed, right? It's kind of a negative thing.
Hmm.
Your guys' definition is what I would be like hyper focused on.
well, you guys bring up another interesting point that I think about when you talk about ambition. Perfectly fine. I think we're all okay with that, and there's a lot of positive that can come from it as long as you're not stepping on someone else to achieve your ambitions. Like Colby said, it's very similar to that buffet analogy that you put out there, Shan, where you can take more and it's okay because it's an endless buffet, right? It's all there as long as you're not pulling the food off of another person's plate. It's okay to be ambitious. Um, But I guess there are going to be times where you find yourself in that situation where the only way you can achieve that objective in the moment is to step on the other person. So my question is, I guess, when how do you guys differentiate the acceptance of something like that versus settling, right? Because in your ambition side of things, I won't want to cross a moral boundary to hit my ambitions. So I'm not going to sacrifice that and move into that greed stretch. But that means I have to accept the situation as it is and maybe find a different way to achieve that ambition, another avenue, or possibly wait a longer period of time until the opportunity arises again, right? And I'm okay with that. But I think there's a danger potentially of tricking ourselves into thinking we're accepting it when really it wouldn't hurt anyone and we're more scared to go after our ambitions and we wind up settling. So, what would you say to someone, one of our listeners, on how to differentiate whether they are holding back and sort of settling because of fear rather than accepting a situation because of the circumstances around, right? Is
I hate
fear
to
holding you
relive.
back?
I hate to relive the buffet analogy, but honestly, it's the best one. So, like, with what you just said, what I immediately thought of is like, okay, you're at a pretty decent buffet. It's got lots of great options. Your end goal is to get a full stomach with good quality food. Um, just be satisfied by that. But of course, they have endless crab legs, right, at this buffet, and these endless crab legs, like you're feeling pretty mean, so you could probably knock out literally all they got. Um, so it
Yeah,
when you
where's
bring
my
up that
crab leg, Shan?
conversation, yeah, when you bring up that, it kind of leaves you with a choice, right? Because you have that end goal of filling your stomach with good high quality food. If you either just hover the crab legs and just go until you can't, and potentially ruin it for someone else, or at least like detract their experience just because you munked all the crab legs, or you could say, let me just take three clusters, and they got this really good from like I don't know, T-bone steak over here, and they got crawfish, and they got
What
maybe even like
buffet are
some
you
watermelon.
at, Shan? Because I tell you what,
Uh,
man.
I'm thinking specifically of a couple I went to in Vegas that were pretty awesome. It was like $80 a piece, and it was pretty great. But yeah, back away from my fantasy. Yeah, let's say they got the T-bone steak, they got the crawfish, they got awesome desserts, they got like really gourmet soups, all this stuff. So you kind of you step away from that moral boundary that you just spoke of, and you still reach your end goal without letting greed come into effect, because you'll feel really good about demolishing those crab legs like all by yourself until later you're like, man, like I kind of wish I diversified, or like you see, I don't know, some old sweet lady get up and go for the crab legs and just can't get any, right? Like it's almost more fulfilling to put the greed aside, but it's very tempting at the same time. So when you ask that question, that's immediately what came to my fat self.
So I'll take the opposite side of it because I think Shan was kind of highlighting sort of like being more tempered in your ambitions potentially at the buffet. I'm not going to make a buffet analogy, but I will say that I think to me this really hinges on competitive integrity and how to compete and be involved in competition in general. Because I think there's a lot of people who temper what they're willing to shoot for and strive for because they will get in a situation where it literally is a zero sum game at some points. There are some things where it's like getting a promotion at a job. That is a zero sum game. There isn't a larger pie that's occurring. There's not like sometimes there's other opportunities for that person, but if that's the one opportunity that both people or multiple people want, that's a zero sum game. One person gets it, the other, kicks sand. I mean that is the harsh reality that you need to understand. But there is nothing wrong with doing everything you can in a moral sense to get that promotion and outcompete the other people. That is just life. And that is something that you need to sort of like start to practice and develop a thicker skin for when you're talking about like what is an appropriate amount of ambition versus being kind of like greedy and immoral. Like to me, being immoral in that situation would be trying to like I guess like get like weird cheap favors with the boss, or like intentionally try to undermine your other people by making them look bad, those sorts of things, right? Like you're being really like, it's not just about you doing a great job, it's about you trying to like sort of like schmooze your way or cheapen others' efforts in order to get above them, right? That would be the whole greedy analogy, or greedy part of it right there. But I generally think that like when you talk about what is the appropriate line and what's crossing the line, like that to me is really the crux of it. Is just that there's a ton of people who, I mean, if you think about it, right, there's actually not a lot of competitive outlets in life. Like if you choose not to engage them, right? Like sports is the biggest one, right? So if you grew up and you didn't play sports, think about like what other competitive outlets people would have learned to compete in, right? I mean, there's not very many outside of like literal competition in like, so like chess would be like a non-physical sport, right? But like even then it's like still like a mental sport, right? There's still a lot of competing involved where you could like learn that and all sorts of stuff. So I think that can be a really hard thing for people who didn't grow up in that environment. Like me, I grew up playing sports. I learned what it meant to be like a competitor. I knew what crossing the line was, but like I'm perfectly okay with that zero sum game of like one person gets it, one person's don't, and you need to know how to lose and you need to know how to win, right? There's grace in defeat and losses, or sorry, defeat and wins, and I think that's really the sort of heart of the issue there, is being okay with the fact that like just because you won and someone lost in a given situation, that doesn't mean that you did something wrong, right? This is just it kind of like, this is the world. Like you will win at things, you will lose at things, and that's equally true for the other people. And unfortunately, like you can't change that. So to me it seems kind of weird that you would intentionally sabotage yourself or set your own self back because you're not accepting the reality of the situation.
Well, I love the fact that you're pointing to what I think is sometimes the hardest thing for people to understand, which is really the only thing you can control is your own actions, right? So you're
Yeah.
talking about from a competitive lens, whether that's sports, academics, the job place, whatever, right? As long as you're not purposely causing detriment to somebody else and you're just focused on your own individual ambition and success, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Circling back, I think again, if you're purposely causing harm to somebody else, now you're crossing into a negative aspect and more into that greed lens, which gets me thinking too. If I do hobble closely back to that buffet table for a second, right? Do you think greed has the potential to cause tunnel vision and have you lose out on other opportunities? Because I'll be honest, if I can jump back again to the Vegas buffet that I went to, and if you were to talk to my wife, I've been searching for this one dessert that I had for 5, 6 years now, and I cannot find this thing. I finally asked ChatGPT and described it, and it said, "Oh, buffets make like special things sometimes in Vegas that like you can only get there that aren't really a normal thing." So I finally chalked it up. Yeah, I finally chucked it up to I may never ever taste that thing again. It was so good, but it was like this weird little dough ball that almost had like a fish taste, but somehow sweet. I can't explain it. Obviously, that
Yeah,
sounds
you
awful.
shouldn't explain it
Yeah,
because yeah,
it
that
sounds
sounds
awful, but
terrible.
I'm telling you, it was the most delicious thing. I probably that was a scenario where that sweet old lady going up for seconds didn't get a chance.
She wasn't getting any. Yeah.
Yeah, I got tunnel vision on that, and I was like, oh. But anyway, that was my larger self back in the day. But my point being, right, getting so focused on a single item, I'm going to miss all of the other opportunities, potentially the T-bone steak, the crab legs, and all of that. How do you, I mean, even if you get the thing you want, you've potentially missed out on so many other items. Would you
Yeah.
guys, do you think that's worth it, right? To throw yourself into one ambition and solely focus in on that? Because there's two schools of thoughts. There's, I'm going to be a subject matter expert, which I think runs the risk of if that subject matter goes away or the job
Mm.
require opportunities or that type of thing start to dissipate, now you've locked yourself into this thing, not that you can't recover, but there's something to be said for being kind of a jack of all trades or having a lot of knowledge in various areas. So what are your guys' approach for that? I'm going to guess that it's probably some sort of split approach where you hyper focus on certain things to build those skills, but you also keep yourself diversified. But I want to hear it from you.
Go ahead, Chen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the saying "don't get greedy," I think it exists for a good reason, right? And it's commonly for that particular reason, right? Because you could either avoid pivoting and continuing your ambition towards a higher goal, just because you've met your match, or at least like you achieved something along the lines that is internally satisfying, right? I think even that can be greedy, right? Like you tend to settle, like we talked. So I think there's layers to it for sure, because it can be a dangerous area, because depending on how much risk is involved to continue to be ambitious, I think it's definitely, like you mentioned, kind of like ends up being brain fog and tunnel vision, and keep you from kind of making the same decisions that got you there in the first place, right? And if I'm talking like an investment portfolio, right? Like I want to save up 100 grand in my bank account, and I am literally like, I'm so ambitious about this. I'm eating ramen every day and not running my AC for 2 years straight. You hit that goal, right? Like, what do you like at that point? You could just stop and then enjoy what you have, and spend it wisely and continue to live off of ramen so you don't blow it all. Or you can kind of not let that greed and the tunnel vision take into effect and continue that ambition towards a larger goal, right? You can pivot, which I feel like is probably the harder thing to do, unfortunately, right? Because when you have something so set to heart, like an investment journey, especially, right? Like you tend to think like, okay, I can continue, but at what point is it going to become risky? Like I could die in the next 2 years of me trying to double this investment portfolio and never spend any of it, right? So it's a difficult decision for sure, and it's something hard not to like put those tunnel vision goggles on whenever you get closer and closer to that goal. I think it's also important because it can really like lower the quality of your life whenever you kind of just fear pivoting, or at least like fear continuing with the same like motivational and ambitious mindset that you had that got you there. Same thing for business, right? You think of any business, like it greed, any great business that has failed, it's usually a layer of greed that's involved in it. Whether it's like pleasing customers until you get to a certain point where you just feel like you're Apple and you can kind of like release a phone with like one feature on it every year and put a high price tag on it, which I'm not saying they're doing. I'm not saying like
They're
they're
totally doing
meeting
that.
their match and they're on their way down for greed. But if they continue to do that for 20 years, I'm pretty sure we'd all see what the overall output would be. So just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's definitely like I am probably like the actual epitome of what you're talking about, Josh, with like the more SME side of things, where it's like I just get absolutely obsessed about certain things and I ignore other things. And that's just, I feel like, honestly, like who I am at a core as a person. I just love to go deep on stuff. I've never enjoyed going like the jack of all trades route just because I've always been uncomfortable with the idea that I don't really know a lot about any of the things. It's just always like I've just never really liked that thing. So I guess it does depend in part, I think, who you are as a person and what you want out of life, right? Like for me, I want to go like super deep and like learn all the cool and interesting things about the things that I'm interested in and that I want to learn. And for all the other stuff, it's like, yeah, I know I'm missing out. And to me, it's just like that's the choice that I'm consciously making, you know? And I think that's really the crux of it is like making a conscious choice that you know the opportunity costs and you're okay with that. And I think as long as you're doing that, you're fine. I don't think either route is bad. It's just what you would prefer and what opportunity and cost you want and what trade-offs you're willing to make.
Yeah.
Because I absolutely love going deep on stuff, and I've never really suffered from FOMO, which I know a lot of people do, like the whole fear of missing out just because it's like, well, yeah, you may be the jack of all trades, but like you're also missing out on the experience of what it feels like to go insanely deep on a subject or a thing. And like I could tell you from firsthand experience that it's amazing and it's irreplaceable. Like you'll never know what that feeling is being a jack of all trades. you think you may know a lot about that subject, but like there's so much that you don't even know that you don't know. So yeah, I think it's just trade-offs, and I think either one's fine, but you just got to make a conscious choice about it.
Yeah, it's a trade off either way.
Yeah.
And that's life, right? You always make choices, and saying yes to one thing typically means you're saying no to something else. So it's a very, very interesting point. I'm thinking something that might benefit our listeners here is we've talked about kind of the value of ambition, the pitfalls that could potentially occur through, moral mishaps and finding yourself in more of that greedy state. What do you do if you find yourself there, right? Like, because I'm sure we're all human, and there's probably been times where we've made a decision based on that greedy impulse, right? I would love to say I never have, but I'm sure I have if I think through things. How do you address that after the fact, right? What are the tips and tricks, I guess I would say, to try to correct that?
So I got a pretty funny example that is pretty ridiculous, but I'll share anyways because I don't care. So I when I was going to college, I definitely needed new underwear, right? Like it's getting old, like you probably should buy underwear every single year. I don't even know what the rate is at which you're supposed to buy underwear.
This is why we mark this as not for kids, everyone. But continue, Colby.
Yeah. It's not like they weren't dirty or anything. It's just that like some got holes in them. Like they're just like,
Yeah.
Colby, just buy yourself some fresh underwear. Like treat yourself, right?
Well,
Right?
man, that's
And they're
okay. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So definitely some like sort of like weird mental illness probably going on there that I didn't buy myself underwear at the time, but that's another point. But anyways, I was like, it was like senior year or junior year or sometime around there. I was just like, you know what? I'll just wait till I graduate, and that'll be the time. Because obviously, like money's a little bit tight. Like you're not like swimming in. I'm just like, I can greed out my underwear purchase and wait until I actually got a job, and it's like, woohoo! Like I can buy myself underwear now. Like go me. And obviously, I definitely could have done it, but I'm super greedy at the time. I'm definitely like a miserly person. I hate spending money. It's my least favorite thing. Like it's always painful. Even if I love the thing that I purchase, it feels so painful for me to purchase it every single time without fail. Um, and obviously, like that's a great example of like sometimes you need to let go and not care about the money, so to speak. Like sometimes there are things that you need that you should do and treat yourself right and all those sorts of good things, right? And obviously it's a silly example, but I do think it illustrates a point that there are things that you feel like unwilling to do because you're trying to like eke out whatever extra thing that you're trying to achieve, right? In this case it's literally money that I'm trying to save. um, but I think, and it's kind of like goes back to like I keep bringing back to competition, just because I think there's like a similar theme here where it's like there's a time and a place to try and eke out every advantage you can in life, and there's a time to not do that, and it's hard to navigate knowing what or like when that's appropriate. But I do think it's like something that I've really strived to be more conscientious of, is because I was definitely at a point in my life at times where I was just trying to min max every sort of thing. It was like toxic productivity, and I think we've touched on that a little bit already. And it just you end up missing out on like sort of the, I guess, randomness sometimes, or just like sort of just letting things be and just kind of experiencing life. Like there's a time to be super productive and a time to get things done, but there's a time to relax and just enjoy life and the things that are around you. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with like even just like the pure financial greediness side of things, right? There's a time, and there are certain things that you should try to save money on and be thoughtful about, but there's other things that you should, like underwear, right? You should definitely just buy yourself clean underwear and stuff that's treat yourself good. But yeah, I thought it was a silly example, but I think it kind of illustrates the point a bit.
Yeah. Shannon, any thoughts around that?
Yeah. No, I think again, like being ambitious, it inevitably comes with the cost of potentially falling for greed, right? And it's tough. And from your specific question, where you find yourself in a position to maybe where you took the greedy path, and now you're paying for it, right? I think the only beneficial thing you can do is take it as a lesson. And for me, like what came to mind is again, like investing, stock trading for me. Like I'm an avid stock trader, and at the very beginning, one thing that took a very long time for me to kind of get good at and recognize is that layer of greed, right? Like there would be riskier plays that I may have made that like I've seen like 100% gain on like in a short amount of time, right? And what happens is normally like your past self would think, oh, I'm cashing out, like I just doubled my money, I'm out. But your current state of mind with that tunnel vision, because of when greed kicks in, you're thinking, well, if I hit 100% in a matter of a week, what if I waited another? It could be 200, it could be 1,000. Like this could be one of those scenarios where I folded and I got a little bit of gain, or I held strong and I'm rich, right? So there's opportunities like that where greed can kind of get involved and make you forget about what your overall game plan was, right? It will literally add those tunnel vision goggles and make you make decisions that your normal, whether it's like morale self or just like your internal characteristics and your internal personality would not have made before the end goal hit, right? So I think it's important to recognize it as a lesson and kind of accept that that tunnel vision is going to happen regardless. You just need to stick true to your game plan. And the people that I've seen who can consistently tackle it with that kind of mindset, they're the ones that generally win overall, right? They're the ones that don't, because 2 weeks later you could end up being down 50%, right, on that same stock option or stock trade. And the ones that kind of never really fall into that boat, or it's very rare, are the ones that are consistent with their game plan.
Yeah. Well, and I think about it too. When I was asking that question, my mind went to Ebenezer Scrooge, right? Probably, arguably, one of the more greedy individuals, but had a great redemption story. And when I think through that redemption story, um, you know, I think we see a high performance hack, which is giving really helps keep you from that greed, right? It combats greed. And it doesn't mean that you have to give money necessarily. It could be time. It could be because at this that giving puts you in a mindset of doing something beyond yourself, right? Greed is all about what can I get from me, and giving
Mm.
in some fashion is always you might get something out of it, but really the impact is always external. You're either giving your time to volunteer, you're giving money to a worthy cause, or whatever that might be. And that kind of, for me, is a great way to ensure that you don't let greed consume you, right? Because to Shan's point, we've all got that temptation. You double your money in something, you're like, man, I should just leave this here and quadruple it, right? Um, but there's a certain element of if I can take it back to Vegas for a second, the blackjack table, when you're up you feel great, you're like, man, I should just keep going. But if you get too greedy you wind up losing it all. And part of the way you can kind of, this is probably, this is on par with your underwear silliness. Part of the way you can keep yourself from getting too caught up in that is tipping the dealer, tipping the person that walks by that brings you a drink or something like that, right? Because now it's not just it's getting you from the mindset that you're not so attached to that pile in front of you. You're not so connected and tunnel vision on that greed, because you're literally just giving it away. Again, it's a small way to kind of keep yourself grounded in the moment and combat that greed. At least, so that's an approach I take.
Plus, you get to feel baller AF, right? Just
Right?
toss the
Yeah.
money wherever I want.
Exactly. No, but I mean, there is, and that's always what you hear, right? There's always this aspect of, okay, a charitable cause, there's always some return to you, right?
Yeah.
Because you get that feeling of good. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's why people continue to do it. And it's a win-win
Yeah.
situation there, right? You're giving back, and yes, you're going to get some good feelings. Um, at least hopefully you do. If you don't initially, keep giving. They'll come, you know, but I think that's a great way to keep you in the right mindset and keep your ambitions aligned with your morality, if you will.
Curious, I would like to kind of like go around and because we've been talking about like balancing stuff a lot, but I would kind of just like dive into like I know we're coming on the end. It's just like where or what was the time like in your adult life that you had a sort of ambition that you chased afterwards, and it can either be a like success story or like a failure story.
I got one for you. I'm pretty proud of this, even though it's a failed story. So a few years back, I don't even know how I stumbled across this, but NASA was accepting applications for an astronaut, right? And I applied, and I was super excited, and I got this rejection letter. Basically, I attached my resume. I had to fill out the resume online as well, and so they were like, "Hey, you can't follow directions, essentially, so and you're not accepted." I'm like, fair enough, right? Um, but then a couple years later, it popped up again, and this one was going like sign up to get trained to go to Mars. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, right? Small chance of probably winning, but I know I was like, I learned from last time. I know what to do, so I filled out my application properly. I had the resume in there, all the information I needed to have, like a real shot at this. But at the time, I was a single dad with 3 kids, right? And I had to check my own ambition, and I never hit submit. So I'll never
Yep.
really know if I would have had a chance at getting that. I mean, the odds were low, right? But it's something that I'll never truly know. I do have my original rejection letter. I've kept that because I hope that one day, after I'm gone, my kids will be going through my stuff and be like, wow, like there's no dream that you shouldn't chase after. If you want to do something, put yourself out there. The worst you can do is not get it, which is what happened in this case. But I think it's a great example of making sure that you don't let that greed give you the tunnel vision, because to be, I've told you guys in the past that when I was younger, I struggled more with ego, and to be the Neil Armstrong of Mars would have been pretty awesome, to be honest. Um, I have no idea where that cohort or any of those individuals that got hired in that round are, or if that's even a thing anymore. But at that moment in time, I had to decide what was most important to me, which was my kids and my family, because this was a 2 year like travel to Mars and be gone for 2 years. I would have came back. My kids would have been, probably 4 years older. 2 years there, 2 years back, plus the training, plus all of the stuff that goes with it. Um, and again, it might have never happened, but all that in the best case scenario, if it would have happened, that's what I would have been signing up for, and that would have been a massive disservice to them, and it would have been to their detriment, which is what we talked about, right? So I had to accept it. I feel like I definitely don't consider it settling, because I continue to push in different avenues. Like we said, sometimes you have to adapt, and I still chase after lofty goals, um, as you guys can attest to. But right now, astronauts on the back burner. Maybe in a few years, if I make $1 million, I think you can buy your way in on a cosmonaut ship, which I would totally do. Um, just got to be patient, and maybe heck, maybe even commercial space travel will happen in my time, and I'll get to do the astronaut thing. But at that moment, I had to put my own greed aside and do what was right. So there's a real world story for you.
What about you, Shane?
I hate talking about this one because it sucks, but it's definitely a it's definitely a fail story that led into like a strong lesson that ultimately I would say probably built some success, but or at least it caused me to be more less risky and more hyper focused on my investment style. Right, so I'll never forget this. Actually, it was while I worked with you both. Um, I decided one day I've always traded stock options. Like some of them are a little bit like riskier in nature when it comes to the time frames that I would trade them at. But I decided that Apple has been letting me down. Back to the story of Apple. I'm sorry, Apple. I don't mean to bag on them, but they had been letting me down every WWDC event, which is around September, and they talk about the new iPhone for the past like 5 years, right? So I literally like months out, I like started piecemealing literally a separate budget that I would use and I was going to either day trade or kind of like week trade and short Apple stock right before the WWDC event. Because like almost every year it's very skeptical. Like people think they know what's going to happen, and
Hmm.
lately, majority of the time, they're about 80 to 90% right, which unfortunately has led to a letdown. Right, like we always want to be shocked. Apple used to be good. I don't know if you guys remember back in 2009 to 2012, you were not knowing. Like they kept it so hush hush. You were not knowing what the new features were going to be, what the new iPhone was going to look like. Like you had some people like have leaks and stuff like that were kind of accurate, but it was any man's guess. But anyway, back to the story. So I put together about like $800 that I was going to just go all in and short Apple stock. So I bought a put on Apple that expired that same day, right before their WWDC event. They had their WWDC event. It went just as the way I expected it to, which I lucked out there, right? And I made almost like $7,000 off of shorting, like on a day trade, just from how high of a risk it was for that put option on Apple. I made like $7,000, and like I was just so ecstatic about it. That was like the most money I've ever made in the shortest amount of time. I ended up selling it, and I think I bought like a Tesla option. I think I bought a calls on Tesla or something like that were also like the next day. It was like the only two times that I've done such a risky play in the same day. Um, and I lost literally like 70% of that money. Like I lost almost all of it. It was the biggest like damn ever. And it was honestly, when we talk about that tunnel vision, like I would have never done that. Like week prior to that, Shan would have been like, you're cashing out. And you're not even going to touch stocks for like a solid week. But it
Yeah, I feel
really
like I'm good for
is.
life.
Yeah, it really is like a devil on your shoulder when it comes to greed. Like it can really make you
Yeah.
flip your entire mindset around just because you're almost like getting high off of that dopamine, right? Like it's just causing you
Dude,
to
your dopamine was through the roof.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a 1,000% return. I'm in.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. And so really like it ended up being good in the long run because I learned a lot. And although I didn't lose money, I definitely did not gain what I should have if I would have stuck to my game plan. But it caused me to think like the person that plans, the person that like sets their ambitions high and stays consistent with the game plan, like they always end up on top. Versus when you get there, like again, I could have chose to pivot and taken a less riskier move and probably eventually doubled that money, or I could have just chose to just be greedy and kind of try to turn that massive win into like an insane win, right? Which was just unrealistic at the time, and it was just not a good move. But that's what I tend to think about when it comes to like thinking about how greed can kind of contradict my game
I want
plan.
more.
I don't know if
Yeah.
I would throw it into the greed column, though, based on everything we've said today, right? You weren't causing detriment to anyone else. You just said, hey, here's money I just won, essentially. I mean, it's like going to the blackjack table and throwing
I
it
mean,
down. And then,
I think not really though, because I got two kids. Was married at the time. Yeah, I definitely could have. I'd let greed get ahead of me there. I could have made
Yeah.
quite a big difference with that.
that context makes a little bit more why I
Yeah.
see that lens. Got it.
Just because it's not obvious someone's losing, like you can't see the person, doesn't mean that it's not still happening. I mean, even when we talk like it's the buffet theory again, right? Unless you're in a buffet in heaven, someone's missing out by what you're taking. So same thing. This it's a liquidity pool. So like if I made $600 million, someone's hurting, right? It's like maybe Colby who decided to buy against that stock, like he's hurting.
Yeah.
So how
Ain't no
how
way
hard
you'll
do
never
I
see me
wanna-
do that.
Yeah, how much do I want to pull from everyone else just to benefit myself, right? I mean, I know that example is kind of an extreme, but
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to Shan's book, A Buffet in Heaven. That's the title
Yeah.
when it comes out. Colby, I know we are, like you said, getting close on time, but we're not going to let you off the hook, man. We need your
Yeah.
story as well. You can ask the question, but we're going to flip it back at you.
No, I mean the reason I even asked is because I had already a good one ready, just because like this one has been it like seared itself into my brain, just as like an experience that I will never forget. It's also a bad one. A lot of positives came from it and a lot of learning, which is honestly the reason I wanted to bring it up is because like I think sometimes people think, oh, ambition is only a good thing, right? And I was like, well, I mean, sometimes ambitions like lead you down a path that leads to failure. But then I thought at the same time, it's like, well, you learn so much if you're smart and you're conscientious about how you're approaching stuff and you're like really aware of what's going on that as long as you're like in that mindset no matter what the ambition is like you can really pull a lot of value out of that which you just don't even get the opportunity to if you don't even start with the ambition to begin with. um but yeah, so I'll get into it. So this is post college. I got my job at Ryder, and which is a commercial truck rental and leasing company. And I was working down in Sarasota, Florida, and pretty like small like rental branch because Sarasota is not like that populated. It's a nice like little beachy area in Florida, but like not a ton of people live there. Very low key. And but I like took on a lot of extra responsibilities. Had a good relationship with my manager, and was just doing a really good job. Like I was kind of alluding to in other episodes, right? I just wanted to whatever I did, I was gonna do well at it. And kind of the next step in line was to get this like sort of rental management or not rental management. It was like basically like a regional sales job. Was kind of like the next step from that position. And you can go anywhere in the country because Ryder is a national company in the United States. And so I was like, well, we're willing to move. Me and my fiance were at the time we're willing to move, and an opportunity came up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and at the time, basically the vision was like, oh, okay, it's a good sales market, so good opportunity because how it worked is like I would have a base salary, and then the commission on top of that. So it wasn't just purely commission, right? I wasn't that psychopathic like that. I could never do that. That's like way too crazy for me, way too much risk. But I was willing to do at least that because it was basically like the same amount of money that I was making with the opportunity for commission. So it should just be a net raise. So fast forward, obviously, like I'm traveling over 1,000 miles across country from Florida to Philadelphia. I've never been to Pennsylvania ever. Don't really know the culture all that well. Don't know anyone there. I don't have family there. It's just me and my fiance, and it was kind of a train wreck. Um, so it was very stressful. The territory wasn't as great as I was led to believe, and part of that is I didn't ask good enough questions to really poke and prod and figure out if it was an actual good territory to work in. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity there. Wasn't really making much more than I was making before. And obviously Philadelphia's got state tax, which I didn't have to deal with, and it's got city tax, and it's just a more expensive area to live in. And yeah, so it didn't go that well. I was kind of starting to turn the other way and like make it a little bit better, and then COVID hit, so it completely like just pandemic hits that no one can plan for obviously, and yeah, that just like turns everything completely haywire. And then on top of that, so a deer runs into the side of my car one day on the way home from work, just basically like dents my like driver's side thing, but like nothing happened, deer was fine, all this sort of stuff. So I'm like, oh, well, that's great. So I'll have to deal with that. And then about a couple days later, my car is parked on the side of the road where I normally park it, and a storm happens, and it's almost like tropical storm weather. And out of the entire street, my car is hit solely by a telephone pole and a massive tree that fell over. And so and then on top of that, while COVID's happening, there's riots and stuff going on. There's looting. It is not like anything that could have gone wrong in this point of my life seemed to be going wrong.
Yeah.
It was really rough. And there's tons of stuff that was just completely out of my control. A lot of things that were in my control leading up to the decision. And my biggest thing looking back that I learned from it was just that, okay, like being ambitious and wanting more was not the problem, Colby, but the problem was is that you were very naive in thinking that you could just handle whatever regardless of the circumstance, and that like you could just make it work. You can't make a turd, a gourmet 5-star meal, right? Like that's sometimes you can't. Yeah, exactly. No one wants that at the buffet, right? You just leave that in the toilet or in the trash, wherever it is, right? And I think that was what I learned from that situation is just that, I was pretty naive, and I needed to realize that, I needed to approach things with a bit more hesitation than I was previously, and I needed to be a bit more reserved, I guess, and thoughtful about the things that I was pursuing. And it's been extremely valuable, and I learned that I wanted to be in a different field and, move back to Florida, all those sorts of good things. So it ended up being like a net positive, even though it was an extremely negative experience. But that doesn't, like, I didn't come out of that being like, oh, I should never be ambitious again.
Awesome. Well, great conversation today, guys. I'm going to turn it over to Shan for final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate that, I think even though things can be as glorified and as positive and have nothing but light on it, such as ambition, motivation, goal setting, all that, everything comes with a cost. And one of those costs of being ambitious is being presented with an opportunity for greed, or at least like the mindset of greed. So, like, my ending thoughts are just trying to get better at recognizing it and sticking with your plan. Because if you don't potentially think about what could happen when greed takes over, and it will take over when you get closer and closer to that goal, you might have to do what I did and take it as a lesson and hope to God that you don't do it again the next time around.
What about you, Colby? Final thoughts today?
I would say final thoughts is just, yeah, don't be afraid to be ambitious.
We lose Colby.
Okay, I thought it was me. I usually have the tech issues, so I thought it might be my video.
Right at the end, too.
All right, well, we'll circle back and maybe he'll have something there, but I'll jump in with my final thoughts until his connection hopefully pops back in. Mine actually go into next week, right? We talked a lot about risk today, and it seemed like a lot of the conversation was adverse to it, but I know for a fact that that's not the case, right? From the people on this call, take a lot of risks. Some win, some lose, obviously, as we told our stories today. But I think next week, a great topic that we can dive into is, risk versus security, and how do you know when to, I guess, take the risk? And obviously, that's going to be individual in nature, but maybe some tips and tricks about how to identify what's good. Because one of the things that always seems to happen is risk comes with great reward, and the more you have to lose, the less likely you want to take risks, right? Which is counter when you think about it, because those risks are how you got to the place where you're at, and now you want to continue on. How do you continue to take those risks? But yeah, that's kind of where my head went. So what I would love to see, and I'm going to embrace my ambition here in asking our audience to tell us what your thoughts are around risk. Give us some thoughts to address next week, and share it with your friends so they can too. And we would just love to continue to provide value across the board. So share this with everyone. And you know what? Maybe next week we'll even kick off in our little What's Up this week with Colby's final thought from this week, since we seem to have lost him. But anything else, Shan, or should we bid adieu to our listeners this week?
No, that's it. And Colby messaged us. He said his laptop died. So we will definitely get his final thoughts next week.
Gotcha. Maybe it will be he should charge his laptop. But
yeah.
Well, all right. Well, we'll find out next week. Don't miss it. Share with your friends so they don't either. And we'll see you next time on Mastermind for the Masses. Thanks, everyone.